It's really clear that the most precious resource we all have is time. Steve Jobs. Suffice it to say that this was obvious long before our era came. Primitive people quickly realized that there were successful hunting and fishing periods. After a while, they noticed the sun was around the same position in such periods, and the sun became their pinpoint for telling time. This is how the first sundial in the world was invented, a stick stuck in the ground. The Egyptians decided that a stick wasn't serious enough, so in 3500 BC, they built huge obelisks. These constructions made it possible to divide the day into 2 parts, 12 hours each. Thus, the Egyptians knew exactly when noon was. Of course, progress is non-stop, and today humankind is familiar with sandglasses, electronic, mechanical, and even atomic clocks. The latter are incredibly accurate. For an atomic clock to be off for 1 second, it must work non-stop for a few 100 billion years. But we think that the fact that there are watches which demonstrate their owner's high status, wealth, and, of course, good taste is much more interesting. And today's video is about the company that brought such watches to life, the Rolex Company. Rocky childhood. Originally, Rolex was named after Wilsdorf and Davis in honor of its founders Hans Wilsdorf and Alfred Davis. The former had the idea, and the latter had the money. Hans Wilsdorf was born in 1881 in Germany. The future entrepreneur's childhood was far from carefree. His parents died when the boy was only 12. His maternal uncle took the responsibility of bringing Hans up, as well as his brother and sister. The relative believed that the best thing he could do was to entrust the children's upbringing to professionals. So he decided to sell the family business, a brewing company, and send the children to a prestigious boarding school. Although the boarding school was a prestigious one, kids are kids, and we all know how cruel they can be. The future entrepreneur had to man up early and learn to stand up for himself. Later in 1946, he published his autobiography entitled Rolex Jubilee Vade Macum, where he wrote, "Our uncle was not indifferent to our fate. Nevertheless, the way he forced me to become independent at a very early age made me get used to taking care of my possessions and looking back, which I believe my success owes much to." Career start. After finishing school and receiving quite a good education, Hans started his career as a trainee in a very influential international company, exporting pearls where, as Hans himself said, he gained very valuable experience. In 1900, Hans decided to change his occupation, but he had no idea what he wanted to do. He followed his school friend's advice and moved to Switzerland, to La Chaux-de-Fonds, where he found a job with an influential watchmaking company called Kuno Korten. Hans was very grateful to his friend because he found his place in life thanks to him. He doubted no longer. The watchmaking art was his life's work. After 3 years of working there, Hans gained valuable knowledge of the existing watch types and their production methods. In 1903, he quit the Swiss company and moved to London, feeling confident in his knowledge and driven by the dream of his own enterprise. Indeed, his ambition and experience in watchmaking might be enough to start his own business, but the money he'd saved was probably not. So he had to find a job at a watchmaking company in London. But of course, he couldn't forget about his dream, which now had become his goal. Starting a company. In England, he got married and received British citizenship. It was not only the love of his life that Hans found, but also a companion in his wife's brother, William Davies. Together with him, he founded the Wilsdorf and Davies Watchmaking Company in 1905. Of course, at first, Wilsdorf had no ready-made watches, nor did he have his own manufacturing. So he went to Switzerland to search for a suitable supplier of watchwork mechanisms. He chose Hermann Egler's Swiss factory in Biel, which produced highly accurate and easy-to-repair mechanisms. Egler's mechanisms were small, which was also important to Wilsdorf, since he planned to sell wristwatches. This is how a century-long partnership between Egler and Rolex began. Egler's watchwork mechanisms were sent to jewelers, who decorated them and put the WD logo inside the case for further sale. This was not to say that the future Rolex did well. You shouldn't forget that rich watches weren't popular in the 1990s. At the time, they were believed to be inaccurate and unreliable. Moreover, men saw such bracelets as a female accessory. However, life taught Wilsdorf watchfulness and observation skills, so he was following fashion trends and noticed that an important part of men's look, the vest, was gradually going out of use. He concluded that pocket watches, which men usually carried in vest pockets, would soon go out of use as well, so there would be a need for a replacement. Hence, Hans would provide this replacement in the form of a wristwatch. Test of strength. Hans had to tackle two challenges to popularize wristwatches. To prove that wristwatches weren't inferior in quality and accuracy in pocket watches. In fact, they were even superior. Of course, it was a difficult task. His colleagues believed that Hans was insane, pursuing such ambitious goals. But history proves that it's such madmen who achieve success. Together with his partner from Switzerland, Hans worked his fingers to the bone. 5 years after the company was founded in 1910, his efforts were rewarded. After 45 day-long tests, Eichler's mechanism, which was made especially for Rolex, received the chronometer status. That's an extremely accurate mechanism within minimum deviations. The Rolex watch was the first wristwatch in the world to get the chronometer status. This status means a lot. Just so you understand, even today in 2022, only 5% of Swiss watches are certified as chronometers. As you may have noticed, now we're talking about Rolex, not Wilsdorf and Davis. Hans renamed his company in 1908. At that time, it was rather unusual because most entrepreneurs and watchmakers in particular named their trademarks after themselves. But Hans wanted the brand name to fit on the dial and to be easy to pronounce in different languages. Rolex met these criteria. Hans explained why he chose Rolex when celebrating the company's anniversary in 1958. Quote, "I tried every possible way to combine the letters of the alphabet. This gave me a few hundred names, but none of them sounded quite right to me. It happened one morning when I was sitting on the upper floor of a double-decker omnibus. That time, riding through London's Cheapside, a kind man whispered in my ear, 'Rolex.'" War comes in handy. After Wilsdorf's watches had been certified as chronometers, customers began to trust their reliability and quality, and sales increased. However, most customers still saw wristwatches as a women's accessory, which hindered further development of the company. Hans' second challenge was to change the public's attitude towards his product. At that time, he still didn't know how to do it, so he decided to focus on the first task and kept working on modernization and improvement of the watchwork mechanism. The Rolex watch was tested in extreme conditions, such as the Kew Observatory in London in 1914. The watch wasn't off a single second, despite the terrible temperature conditions. It was assigned the A Precision grade, which was previously only awarded to professional marine chronometers. 14 days after the watch had passed the test, the First World War began. The military became Wilsdorf's main customer, who appreciated the precision of the watches. In addition, the wristwatches were far more convenient than the pocket watches. During battle, officers didn't have time to look in their pocket for a watch. Thus, Rolex was associated with the brave men defending their homeland. The wristwatch became an indispensable attribute of field commanders and was never again labeled as a woman's accessory. Sales skyrocketed, but at the same time, Great Britain was determined to support its economy and local industry and introduced a high 33% customs duty on foreign goods in 1915. Although Rolex was a British company, it received watchwork mechanisms from Switzerland, so Hans decided to move the headquarters from London to Bienne, and in 1919 he relocated it to the capital of Switzerland, Geneva, where it remains to this day. Time to prepare. The company developed rapidly. After the First World War, the Rolex brand earned an excellent reputation, and Swiss watches were increasingly in demand. However, this positive trend didn't cause Hans to relax. He believed it was only the beginning and wasn't going to bask in his success. Besides its reliability, Rolex, which had survived hell and high water during the First World War, had its shortcomings revealed as well. The watch leaked dust and moisture. The problem was that the design made it impossible to perfectly close the case, that is to seal it, because of the crown. Being aware of this problem and the need to solve it, Wilsdorf clearly saw the company's next step. to make the world's first waterproof watch. He succeeded in 1926. Egler's best minds came up with a special design for Rolex. A new crown was screwed into the case after winding, which allowed the watch to remain waterproof. The invention was implemented in a new model called Rolex Oyster. The world's first waterproof watch got its name because of the fact that the case's parts fit tightly to each other like an oyster shell. However, despite the company's good reputation, customers couldn't believe that the novel watch was impermeable. A daredevil. Hans decided to earn potential customers' trust. He wanted to demonstrate the performance of his new model in water. For this, in his stores, he set up special aquarium showcases, where the new model of the watch accompanied plants and various fish. Passers-by became very interested in such an unusual showcase and were quite amazed when they realized that the watch at the aquarium bottom worked just as it should. However, few people passed by Wilsdorf's store, and Hans realized that he needed a large-scale advertising campaign. Fortune favored the businessman. Hans learned that Mercedes Glitz, the first girl to swim across the English Channel, wanted to repeat her record. This event attracted a lot of attention from the press, and Hans saw an opportunity to promote his watch and prove its reliability to the public. On the 7th of October 1927, he personally presented the swimmer with a brand new Rolex Oyster before the race with only one condition: she shouldn't take off her watch during the race. The watch spent 15 hours and 15 minutes on the sportswoman's hand in the water. When she came ashore in France, the watch was running just as it did before the dive. It wasn't off a second. It was a strong and successful presentation of the new model, which set off the Rolex advertising campaign. Hans Wilsdorf bought the front page of the London Daily Mail for 40,000 Swiss francs. There, he ordered to print a photo of the happy champion Mercedes and the inscription, "Rolex Oyster, the wonder watch that defies the elements. Moisture-proof, waterproof, heat-proof, vibration-proof, cold-proof, and dust-proof." This advertising bought the company worldwide fame, and from then on, no one doubted that Rolex watches were waterproof. Infinity is only the beginning. The work on improving the watches didn't end there. In 1931, a Rolex engineer, Emil Breuer, introduced a rotor-based system of automatic winding. That is, the watch winds itself by a slight hand movement. The invention was introduced in a new Rolex Oyster Perpetual model. It was convenient, airtight, and had a great name. Soon, Rolex Oyster Perpetual became the most popular watch, and Rolex was the #1 brand for customers who had to work under extreme conditions. Indeed, there were no conditions more extreme or more dangerous than war. When the Second World War began, the military were the company's main clients again, but the Nazis appreciated the Rolex products as well. Wristwatches became their favorite trophy. After capturing enemy troops, they deprived prisoners of war of their watches. When Wilsdorf learned about it, he offered to replace all the confiscated watches free of charge if the officers would send Rolex a letter describing the circumstances of the confiscation and the alleged place of location of the watch. These explanations were enough. Wilsdorf took them on trust and personally supervised the work. This is how Rolex became full-fledged heroes of the Great Escape. When Corporal Clive Nutting was taken prisoner of war during the Second World War, he managed to order a Rolex Oyster to the camp using the above-described scheme. Using this accurate watch, the quick-witted soldier could calculate the guard's movement schedule, which helped him to escape. These events provided the basis for the Great Escape movie. Conclusion. In 1944, Hans' first wife, Florence Frances May Wilsdorf Crotty, died of illness. The Wilsdorfs had no children. In 1945, Hans founded the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, to which he bequeathed a 100% stake in Rolex. To this day, the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation owns and controls Rolex and donates a significant part of its income to charity and social goals in Geneva, Switzerland. The founder of Rolex passed away in 1960 after entrusting its company to the trust fund. He wanted the company to continue working according to the principles he had established. To protect them, he worked out a shareholding system that implied that no one would receive part of the company without getting consent of all owners. He limited the owners' power. They can't put pressure on the managers in any way. Therefore, the company management is based on a long-term strategy and doesn't strive for getting rich quickly. They set the price for watches at their discretion, independently of competitors' prices. Rolex doesn't allow oversupply on the market and creates artificial shortages, producing no more than 800,000 watches a year. The company has never followed any trend. As Andre Heinegger, the company's first manager after Wilsdorf's death, said, "No avant-garde, no fancy digits, no uncommon case shapes." The company never offers discounts and doesn't hold sales. Amazingly, even today in 2022, you can't buy a Rolex watch online. The company runs no TV ads, no radio messages or internet banners. What for? Their clients are the best advertising, the leaders of nations, directors, businessmen, athletes, and actors. Rolex conquered Mount Everest with Edmund Hillary's British expedition in 1953, reached the Mariana Trench bottom in 1960. Rolex doesn't share its name with anything else. You won't see it on glasses, bags, cars, or clothes. They make watches and nothing else. And our team believes they're the best at it. What do you think? Share your opinions in the comments.